Welcome to the Megan Claire Show. I'm a cancer survivor, patient advocate, and your host, Megan Claire Chase. I am working with Ancora AI to help share their mission, which is to give unbiased and comprehensive information for patients to empower and bring vetted trial options to all patients. Now, you might recognize the face next to me from our previous episode about self-care. It's Dr. Brian Clemente, clinical psychologist, and his practice is The Mind and More in California, where he has over 20 years of experience working with children, adolescents, and adults. And he's also an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University. Welcome back, Dr. Brian.
You don't have to remind everyone how we know each other?
Right, I was just about to say that. Oh my gosh, great minds. So in case you missed the last episode, Dr. Brian and I know each other from the college days, from the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. So we were friends. And it's so random how we ended up reconnecting. Where? On LinkedIn. So the College of St. Rose did an article on me about my breast cancer and the difficulties in getting my scans and things like that because of COVID, because I lost the insurance. And lo and behold, they post it on LinkedIn. And what happens? That one right there.
And here we are.
Exactly. So he reached out and I was like, oh my God, I totally remember you. So this has just been such a treat that we get to do this together. So thanks again for joining us today, Dr. Brian and my friend.
Oh, me. I thought we were talking to everybody else. I'm like, yes, thank you. Oh, right, me.
So today's episode is about the different phases of a clinical trial and what it means for both patient and doctor. But before we do that, Dr. Brian is going to debunk some misconceptions about them. I know two of the biggest ones are that you have to be stage 4 before you can be considered in a trial, and that you might possibly receive a placebo. So how can we change the narrative? What is a clinical trial? Dr. Brian, take it away.
Well, let's see. So clinical trial is basically research. And in order to say that a drug, which is what we're referencing, does what it's supposed to, or in theory, we want it to do, we have to conduct a trial. So to debunk the myth that you have to be stage 4 and have no options left to become eligible for a clinical trial, that's not true. So there's a lot of different things or criteria that make you eligible. But the important thing is that you could get access to a drug or a kind of treatment by participating in a clinical trial. And that's what we'll be talking more about today. And yes, there is, depending on the type of protocol they set up, there is a chance you might end up with a placebo, but that's trial specific. So that's not a generic always case.
Okay. Well, also too, that it's not a guarantee that the treatment is essentially going to, work as well, because that's what trials are, right?
Yes. So, and this is what we're about to discuss, is there's different phases, and each phase has a kind of goal, if you will. And some of the phases, getting a treatment effect or a benefit from the actual drug is not always the case. So that's where, and that's what you and I will hopefully start walking people through, is how to shop and find a trial to fit their individual and particular needs. So,
yeah, well, why don't we get down to the nitty gritty, Brian, Dr. Brian, whoops. Let's break down the different phases of a clinical trial so patients and caregivers or whoever is listening can understand them better?
So as we just said, the phase 1 is the first step, and that's where in that phase, the researchers have transitioned from, and I hate to say it, but the animal studies, that still happens. And phase 1 is the first time that they will give the drug to humans. So it really is just, it's safe, and you're going to be okay, and we want to watch you when we put this new substance into your body. That's phase 1. Mm-hmm. Then phase 2 is when we start to get into dosing. Just to clarify, phase 1, there's clearly no treatment benefit. You may, but it's unlikely, because they're just kind of essentially putting it in your body and seeing what happens. Phase 2 is when we start to get into dosing, and they try different amounts. And so again, depending on where you are and where you end up in the study, they start giving more and more till they start to see something happening. Obviously, with cancer, they want to change the cancer cells in some way. So They're watched closely at that. In phase 3, they start to get into kind of the more specifics of the dosing. What dose seems to be the most effective without, of course, as always, balancing without causing too many problems. So this is where you see those pharmaceutical commercials, and they say potential side effects, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I don't want to take it. So that whole list comes from the clinical trials, because if you say it's happening to you because you're taking the drug, they have to document it and report it. And then both you and I didn't really realize there's a phase 4, but there is actually a phase 4 where it's just more people are involved. And that's something that I didn't really emphasize through each phase. Phase 1, much smaller group of people, if you will, just they only need to test a few people. Phase 2, you get to a larger population. Phase 3, again, more people. So each phase increases the number as well. And this gets into a little bit nitty-gritty of research, but again, clinical trials, their goal is to attribute the change in, for example, cancer is due to the pill. So that's the whole goal of a clinical trial. And if we give it to a group of people with a particular kind of cancer, we want to be able to infer essentially that this will be beneficial for the masses.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's the whole goal.
Right.
So I just said a lot.
Well, that was a lot to unpack, right? But I feel, you did that in a way that, we can understand the process of the different phases, of a trial. And so as we wrap up, because this one's, short and sweet, what is some standard advice that you would give to patients who still might be hesitant to participate in clinical trials?
Well, kind of just from where we started with debunking some myths, accessing a trial might give someone the ability or give someone access to a treatment their insurance might not cover, or they might not be able to pay for out of pocket. So shopping for a clinical trial really might provide more opportunities or some different treatment options that a doctor might not consider because it's not a standard of care already. Clinical trials opens up a whole, world of options, which people somehow have turned that around and thinking that we've explored all traditional standard of care options, so now there's no choice left but to go clinical trials. That's not the way to think about it. Clinical trials can be your first line of defense potentially, because it's going to be the newest, most cutting edge thing out there, potentially.
That is so huge, because the more I learn about clinical trials and just knowing that it can be an option to your treatment, that you don't have to be stage 4 and essentially dying before you can be considered for a clinical trial. So I think it's really important that patients, and their doctors understand that you know, maybe a clinical trial could be an option, you know, to add to their treatment, or if something isn't working, you know, again, consider another clinical trial. So it's important that, you know, I hope patients realize they're not as scary, I think, as, you know, the myths make them out to be. So, oh my gosh.
Well, and this is such a big topic that, you know, you and I are trying to pare this down and make this simple, and we could tangent off to 17,000 topics, which will potentially be 17,000 different episodes.
Right. Right.
But, you know, I think we're trying to kind of break the ice, if you will, that scary. Clinical trials aren't scary. And the more informed you are and the more knowledge you have about them, the better you and the more informed you can be in terms of shopping and making good choices for your care.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bryan, for being with us today. As usual, you have just given us so much knowledge.
So much.
Right? I mean, you're pretty smart.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of know what you're talking about there, Mr. Psychologist.
Well, some days.
Well, if you want to know more about Dr. Bryan and his services, you can go to themindandmore.com. Now, also make sure to check out the resources on Encora AI, like their glossary and articles, by going to encora.ai. And if you have any questions or want us to cover something in particular, leave a comment below and we'll do that, right? And make sure to catch up on previous episodes so you can see our faces some more, right? I am Megan Claire Chase. And remember, the more you know, the more empowered you will be.